My name is Dr. Sofra. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology from New York and a doctorate in neurophysiology from London. Thank you very much for inviting me to present this lecture of the dark reflection of sadism within the brilliance of the narcissistic persona. This presentation is based on 2 published articles. I have several publications, including a book that was just published, Checkmate by Protean Invisible Enemy, which is about COVID-19 and how we can fight it by increasing our immunity. There are other articles like Female Sexuality, a randomized longitudinal study on neuropathic pain, on wounds, on visceral fat, on safeguarding health and how hormonal balance can safeguard health. It's about 21 articles that I have written, some of them about COVID-19, others about visceral fat and how and toxicity. I have a number of interests because of my wide range of education. What is narcissism? Everybody has a measure of narcissism, a level of narcissism. However, when that becomes excessive and it's rigidified, then it becomes pathological. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Narcissism is defined by arrogance, grandiosity, entitlement, envy, and a relentless pursuit of luxury, wealth, and endless love, eroded by a lack of empathy and a disingenuous negative form of attachment driven by exploitation. Individuals with narcissistic personality disorder are often successful. They feature the CEOs or government officials, and they are very impressive. They're always impressive, except that if you look into it very carefully, you see that there is a sort of a headline intelligence that lacks substance. Covertly, narcissists are doubt-ridden, deeply envious of others, chronically bored, corruptible, and unable to love. They often practice logic-defined, unidimensional faulty judgment, displaying an allergy to criticism and unforgiving rage against opponents. The narcissist's unrestrained drive for extravagance and success is best described by Fennikel's phenomenon of the Don Juan of achievement, or Tartakov's description of the Nobel Prize complex syndrome. So we did a double-blind, randomized clinical trial with 84 participants. We had 2 experimental groups. One we found in club houses and private clubs and friends of friends, celebrities that agreed to participate in the study. And they were between 34 and 59 years old, and their income was above 150,000 USD a year. Actually, it was far higher than that. That was the lowest. And then we compared that group to an experimental group of narcissistic patients that we found in different clinics and psychiatric hospitals. In the experimental group of high-functioning narcissism, we also compared to a control group of people that were high achievers but did not qualify as narcissistic personalities. And the group of patients we also compared against other patients that did not have narcissism. The only personality disorder that we included was not otherwise specified because we want to exclude hysterical and also hypomanic or borderline that sometimes have narcissistic features. This double-blind randomized clinical trial, again, it was 84 participants, we found that the mental patients that were diagnosed with narcissism and narcissistic celebrities mirror each other's paranoid, obsessive, and histrionic symptomatology. In other words, they're equally pathologically, they have the same pathological disorders. Both high and low functioning narcissisms exhibited grandiosity, manipulative charm, and inner emptiness. The main difference between them was the elite narcissists manifested insidious sadism in the absence of depressive affect, while the narcissistic patients exhibited depressive and masochistic symptomatology. Elite narcissists demonstrated an advanced capacity for empathy. This contradicts all past literature. However, their empathic advantage appeared void of compassion. Empathy seemed to be employed as a self-serving tactic to understand others for the purpose of exploitation, intimidation, and subordination. Both high and low functioning narcissists evidenced more prevalent psychopathology than their reciprocal control groups. They also demonstrated higher achievement, efficacy, and ambition, confirming the narcissist's finesse in concealing psychopathology under the brilliance of their pseudo-superiority. The main danger that we saw when we were exploring this group of narcissistic patients and elite narcissism, it was the affinity between masochism and sadism that bonds low and high functioning narcissistic counterparts to endlessly feel from each other's pathology, forming dysfunctional interpersonal relationships, cults, or disintegrating societies. This sadomasochistic dependency also reflects several countries' authoritarian trends where narcissistic constituents, unyielding loyalty, elevates idolized leaders to power, preluding the establishment of toxic, tyrannical governments. The devotees are driven by the erroneous belief that the leader's supremacy has transformational powers to reform them into glamour replicas, actualizing their narcissistic ambition for superiority and perfection. Losing this alliance depletes hope, submerging them into a dreamless emptiness. Again, I'm talking about the low-functioning narcissists. This interdependent relationship is beyond adoration. It entangles leaders and devotees into an unbreakable, indispensable attachment, or otherwise defined as the narcissistic counterpart interconnection. The instruments we used 3 instruments to basically classify narcissists from non-narcissists. The narcissist personality inventory, diagnostic interview for narcissism, and the personality diagnostic questioning, the PDQ. Now, this we gave both to the patients. We also looked, of course, at the diagnosis and we chose, but we had to, some of these patients did not qualify according to our instruments, we did not include them. And we also administered the same instruments to elite narcissists from clubhouses and celebrities, so on and so forth, that we could get them to agree. Then, after we classified the subjects into the 4 groups, then we administered the DEQ, the Depressive Experiences Questionnaire, the Epigenetic Assessment Rating Scale, that's a instrument that was developed by one of my professors, Arnold Wilson, Dr. Wilson, and the structured interview for DSM, the 3, the 3R, and the 4 personality. The results of the structural interview for DSM personality were very interesting. What we found is that the elite narcissists were singled out by their sadism, whereas the narcissistic patients were singled out by their masochism. When you compared low and high function narcissism, what you could see, there was no difference in the obsessiveness. They were both quite obsessive, both their style and the symptomatology. The histrionic style and the histrionic symptoms were much higher with narcissistic patients, and also the paranoid symptoms and style were also much higher with narcissistic patients than the elite narcissisms. But when you compare elite narcissisms against their own high-functioning group of non-narcissistic adults, then what you found is that the narcissistic patients, the narcissistic elite, they were substantially equivalent when it came to masochism. So they did not demonstrate any masochism. They demonstrated sadism, much higher sadism than the other adults that were successful. And they demonstrated more obsessive style, obsessive symptoms, more histrionic style, histrionic symptoms, and paranoia than the adults that were also successful but non-narcissistic. When it came down to patients being compared, narcissistic patients against non-narcissistic patients, then what we could see, it was that the narcissistic patients were higher on sadism and masochism. They were also higher on obsessive style, histrionic style, not symptomatology, but when it came to paranoia, they were definitely more paranoid than the rest of the group. Even from paranoid schizophrenics, they seem to be more paranoid. So this graphic basically shows you how it's like an intertwined relationship, how the sadism and the masochism are intertwined. And it goes this way. If it changes the direction, then the two can switch roles. And that can happen within relationships, not within companies, but within relationships, you can see a switch from the sadistic position to the masochistic position and back. This is basically exactly what I said before. Narcissistic patients' experimental group showed higher masochism than both the experimental group of successful narcissistic adults and more sadism and masochism than the patient control group. And they also manifested more histrionic paranoid symptoms than the experimental group of successful narcissists, and more obsessive, histrionic, and paranoid traits, as well as paranoid symptomatology compared to the control patients. And the elite successful narcissists manifested greater sadism than the experimental group of patients, and greater psychopathology, including sadism, but not masochism, when they were compared to the successful adults. Basically, what you saw here is that a great discrepancy between sadism and masochism. The elite successful narcissists were primarily sadistic. And when they were compared to everybody else, then they demonstrated far greater psychopathology if you tested them, but not the masochism. And again, this is basically gives in more detail the results of the structural interview. Now, when we were looking at the depressive experience question, that's another surprising fact. You would expect as a successful narcissist to have some level of depression. They did not. Actually, it was the patients, the narcissistic patients, that had a higher dependency and analytic depression and a higher self-criticism and higher depression. However, when you looked at the efficacy, what you saw is that the successful narcissism were higher efficacy that you would expect them to have, and very high empathy, which is something that we did not expect. Now, when you were comparing high and low narcissism patients, what you saw is that the patients, the narcissistic patients, appeared more independent than all the other patients. But they were more critical of themselves. So they would get depressed more easily. So they would go basically up and down. And very interestingly, they were higher in efficacy. The empathy was the same in both groups. When you compared the high functioning narcissism against the non-narcissistic adults that were also successful, what you found is that they were equally independent. There was no dependency there, okay? And there was no criticism. There was no depression. There was a very conspicuous absence of depression in the narcissistic group. Very high efficacy, much higher efficacy. And the empathy was much higher than their people that are very successful, but were not narcissistic. So basically, if you looked at these groups from this standpoint, they were indistinguishable, with the exception that the narcissists were more able to succeed and they had a greater capacity to know exactly what the other person is thinking. So this was very interesting because you would expect, again, narcissistic elite people to have some measure of depression because narcissism is a defense, it covers up. They did not, or at least our instruments did not pick it up. The narcissistic patients, however, were more dependent when you compare to the successful ones, but more independent when you compare them to the patients. And the elite narcissists had higher ability for empathy than everybody else, including other successful individuals. And of course, they had a much better capacity to succeed. Interestingly, and we saw that more with the years, the epigenetic assessment scheme, under high arousal conditions, this was reversed. The empathy, the capacity for empathy disappeared and the pathology appeared to increase substantially. So here is the results of the low arousal. We gave this the TAT, the thematic perception test, that was included in the assessment of the ears. And what we found is that when in low arousal, they appear to be functioning like normal people. They were at the higher level of functioning, and that's the elite narcissists, not the patients. The patients also did much better with a lower arousal position. So, but the elite narcissists, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart from anybody else. What happens in the high arousal situation, however, what you saw was a significant regression. So what you expect from these people is to do excellent professionally, but when it gets into relationships, that's when they start messing up, because that's when they have a high arousal condition, and therefore they start regressing, and the psychopathology starts becoming more evident. As you can have them as leaders or as CEOs or directors. They're doing great. The finding of this clinical study elucidated a portrait of the narcissistic personality disorder at two distinct levels of functioning. Elite narcissists appear in part by their obsessive traits in accomplishing what their colleagues may dismiss as unreachable. Their hysterical traits provide them with a seductive warmth and charm designed to increase their popularity and manipulate others to their advantage. The paranoia provides them with hypervigilance and mistrust, instrumental in perceiving and anticipating hidden competition or dangers in the environment. Their sadistic traits are interwoven with their paranoid traits, establishing a sophisticated line of defense expressed covertly by passive aggression and avoidance, or overtly by confrontation and combative attack, characterized by ruthlessness and lack of respect for human rights. In spite of their maladaptive nature, actually sadism appeared to be highly adaptive in this narcissistic structure, because it helped them get to their goals and not feel sorry for anybody while they're doing it. Inherent in sadistic organization is a sense of pseudo-autonomy and being endowed by unlimited controlling power over others. So that makes them more confident. It gives them that confidence to just go ahead and try to go get it. None of this, of course, is genuine or useful in providing the narcissist with psychological growth or health. They are essential, however, in promoting a facade of superiority and grandiose perfection that is necessary for them to attain social prestige and success. One of the most important revelations of this experimental research was that narcissistic individuals who entertain social acclaim and success in their prestigious career position manifest regressive pathology encountered in mental patients diagnosed with narcissism when the conditions of arousal are high. This finding may serve as a warning to the possible adverse consequences of electing narcissistic leaders into high government positions or authorizing a charismatic yet psychologically defective individual to run a major corporation. The ruthless, enthralling compulsion to maintain dominance and sovereignty usually becomes conspicuous only after the narcissistic individual has aggregated the necessary authority to relentlessly exterminate opposition at that level. It's too late. A second surprising revelation was the elite nurses' capacity for empathy that surpassed both their non-narcissistic colleagues and, of course, the narcissistic patients, as expected. This empathic advantage was highly compromised under conditions of high arousal to be equivalent to the empathic skills of non-narcissistic successful individuals. So they were still high in empathy, but like as high as anybody else, not better, but as good. Even under high arousal conditions. So they know exactly what you feel, but because of their psychopathology, under high arousal conditions and the sadism, they will torment the other individual, and the relationship is going to be hell. Although narcissistic patients share a lot of characteristics with their privileged counterparts, their prominent masochism drives them into self-deprecation. Being a victim has the benefits of virtue, propriety, and gentility in contrast to their aggression, onto whom they have projected all their hostility and sadism, and who is now under the obligation of atonement and to nurture and shelter them. And this is their expectation in the relation, the whole. Their analytic depression and harsh self-criticism attenuate their dependency. So they use their hysterical traits to incapacitate themselves, appearing disorganized, careless, and in desperate need of others, actively sabotaging any career prospects. And that is the problem with pathologically narcissistic patients. Their only route to self-enhancement is attaching themselves to an elite narcissism, after exhibiting erotomania, blind idealization, or fanatic loyalty. These low-level narcissistic types serve as a primary source of power of the charismatic narcissistic leader, rendering both narcissistic follower and its idolized authority equally dangerous. It's the very low-level narcissist's glorified admiration that supports and establishes the dominance of a toxic, vicious tyrant. This sadomasochistic alignment, where low and high-level narcissists feed from each other's pathology, is often concretized in the impossibility of escape and manifested in cults and authoritarian relationships. With this, I would like to thank you for listening to this lecture. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me at science@iellios.com. Thank you.